UK, which is known as Anti-Slavery Day. In 2025, I think we can all agree slavery is wrong. But does it shock you that we actually have to have a specific day for it in this day and age?
No.
A few yes and no there, but yeah, perhaps very real to the signs which are going on. When we think of slavery, I often think of a very Western view. My mind is taken back to slavery I was taught about at school, which occurred both in this country and later on, continuing for a bit longer in America, where people were taken from their homes and forced to work in industry or on plantations and treated less than human. What is shameful is that many of the people who were slave owners were Christians too. Slavery can be found in the Bible, and so they have used this to justify having a slave. Yet the treatment of slaves was not biblical, it wasn't Christian, and the likes of John Newton, a slave trader himself and preacher who wrote Amazing Grace, is one of those who helped to abolish it in the UK when it dawned on him just how wrong it was, how unbiblical it was. I recall learning about it at school, and we tend to think that that's all it was for some of us, just history. But slavery occurs today, even in the UK, and often slaves can be hidden in plain sight. In our own community, we may have come into contact with them and not realised. It was estimated that there are 122,000 people in the UK who are trapped in this type of exploitation. This shouldn't be the case, and this is abhorrent that it is happening at all today. The fact that in the UK history, we know it happened not too long ago, and people use the Bible to justify it as well, is troubling. So let's look at slavery in the Bible, how it differs to what we may think about it when we think about slavery in our community, as well as in history as well. Our Bible reading we heard was from Ephesians, and it's a set of rules as how Christians should live. It is Paul writing to the church in Ephesus, which would be read in churches as they met in Christian homes. Copies of the letters would be made, and they'd be passed around, and it would be read out while generally a meal would be had. And so it is important to acknowledge the historical setting in that slavery was common in this culture. In the Old Testament, laws similar to other cultures protected the rights of the slave, as they were often would work for a period of time to pay off their debt, but never indefinitely, as I've spoken about before here. You got to the year of Jubilee and you were freed. No one should be a slave forever in that system, and they had more rights. In the Roman culture as well, that's going on at the same time as well as the Jewish culture. And in Roman culture, where we find Paul writing this letter to the Ephesians, there would be a man generally who would be head of the household with the family. And in that family, consisting of his immediate family, slaves, anyone else who lived in the household, he could do whatever he wanted with him in terms of in that structure, sexually, physically abusing them in many particular ways, whether they were family or slave. That is the Roman culture this is being written in. And so Paul addresses this with three very distinct instructions to the Ephesians about how people should live in Christian households, although today the main focus will be on the latter. How the relationships with each other should be done the Jesus way and not the cultural way that they found themselves in at the time of the Roman culture. So on receiving this letter, copies would be made, they'd be read out in people's houses, and you can imagine them all sat at the table, and it would normally generally be a slave, an educated slave, that would read it out. And so he begins with this: husbands and wives. And I imagine husbands, head of the household, sitting back at the table. They have a drink, they're sipping on it. They're reading all of this. We get to verse 22. This all sounds good, yes. Wives, submit to your husbands. They're thinking, yeah, this is the Roman way. This is what we're used to. This is what everything does. That would be good. And then what comes next, I can almost imagine as a TV kind of where they spit, I'm not going to do it, where it's not hygienic, where they spits out the water as so shocking. What comes next? I can picture their response as they hear verse 25 read out. Husbands, love your wives, just as Christ loved the church and gave himself up for her. Suddenly, this is not the Roman way. They can't continue in this cultural behaviour at all. Jesus loved the church to the point of death of himself, so the church could live. This is the love husbands have told to show, which is a tall ask to be done in the relationship by both, one which is of mutual love and respect. I imagine a similar reaction as we read on between parents and children in chapter 6, verses 1 to 4, where they're told to go against, again, the culture of the time. And here, love is the key in that relationship. And the final group in these three links to our theme today, verses 5 to 9, about the relationship between slaves and masters. Says, slaves, obey your earthly masters with respect and fear, with sincerity of heart, just as you would obey Christ. Obey them not only to win their favour when their eye is on you, but as slaves of Christ, doing the will of God from your heart. Serve wholeheartedly as if you were serving the Lord, not people, because you know that the Lord will reward each one of you for whatever good they do, whether they are slave or free. Slaves are called to obedience to show integrity of their work. However, the masters, the slave owners, are told, and masters, treat your slaves in the same way. Exactly the same rules apply. There's a sense that they have to, again, go against the culture they are in to do things differently, the Jesus way. That they are to do things out of love and respect in their relationships. Paul continues, don't threaten them, since you know that he who is both their master and yours is in heaven, and there is no favoritism with him, with God. In Jesus' eyes, we are all the same. Paul reminds us elsewhere, there's neither Jew nor Gentile, neither slave nor free, neither male nor female, for you are all one in Christ Jesus. And so there is this overarching principle in all of these relationships in Ephesians 5 and 6 that can be found in verse 21. Submit to one another out of reverence for Christ. I wonder, is that how we go about our relationships with one another? The social hierarchies that we find in Roman times when Paul was writing, well, they don't apply in this 21st century in Morecambe just now, do they? We can treat each other with love. And if we are speaking about and talking to Jesus himself, that's how we should do it. To love our neighbour as we love ourselves. We do this because we love God and love others. I wonder, will you do this? In your everyday life, treat people with love and respect, the way that Jesus did. Friends, we've seen in this Bible reading a New Testament structure of how in the household that slavery was a part of. And when you're reading it, I think you can agree that the slavery, we may remember from school history lessons, is not showing submitting one another out of reverence to Christ, is it? Was that just me? The slavery that a few hundred years ago was justified is very different to this in Ephesians, and entirely wrong and unbiblical. And yet we know that today modern slavery does still happen. There are people trapped in slavery in this community that are used for labour, sex, or something else, and for them life is not right now and may seem hopeless. In England and Wales, the Salvation Army holds a contract with the government to provide support for adult victims of human trafficking. We can be there to help pick up the pieces to see those who may otherwise be unseen. So are you prepared to stand against those who may be going against so much hurt through this inhumane trade? Are you willing to do that?
Yeah.
We're going to watch a short video, only a minute long, to help spot those signs we might come across.
Right now, slavery is bigger than at any other time in history. The need to escape poverty, persecution, and conflict, together with the demand for cheap goods, cheap labor, and cheap sex, have created the perfect storm for human trafficking. Yes, even here in the UK. Modern slavery is very much hidden in plain sight, and when you're being controlled and exploited, you rely on other people to spot the signs. So this is what to look out for. Someone might be speaking for them, paying for their travel, or they may not be sure of their own address. Maybe they look frightened, disheveled, malnourished, or have untreated injuries. But the surest sign is, if it doesn't look right, then something could be wrong. So please, don't hesitate to call. Imagine the difference you could make.
People are at times forced into a life they didn't ask for. I wonder, will you stand against it? Will you stand and say no one should be sold like they are goods, as if you would get in a supermarket if they've got a barcode on? And yet this may be happening on our doorstep. No one should live like this in fear every day, yet this is a daily nightmare for those who are caught up in it. No one should be controlled like this, not in 2025. No one is invisible to Jesus. This is not the Jesus way. We are called to submit to one another out of reverence for Christ. As we pause and as we reflect, we're going to sing Song 32, How Deep the Father's